Hello. Hi, everyone. Very good morning and good evening. And welcome to the show Cafe Log with Naga. And today's topic, we are going to deep dive into program management strategies, like how to bring, how to change the chaos into clarity. So I have my very special guest who's, I mean, dear to me and very close. We have worked together and a lot to talk about, but I will reserve my introduction after Tim talks about. So please welcome Tim Dutton, who is a program management expert, worked in the finance and insurance domain for a long time. So I have him today to talk about his strategies and how we can bring clarity in the VUCA world. Right? Welcome to my show, Tim.
Thanks, Naga. Great to see you and great to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with. I definitely wanted to uh, do the introduction, but I wanted to hear from you on your journey into the information technology world, and it's probably 3 decades of experience, and especially in the finance and insurance domain. So please talk about your journey and your experience and the different digital strategy transformations you've done, and a lot to probably please give a glimpse into your experience for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been involved in technology for a long time. For most of my life, I was quite fortunate that going through school in Australia, my school had pretty state-of-the-art technology at the time, computers and coding and all that sort of stuff, which I think in the 80s was pretty ahead of its time. And so I've always had an interest in technology. I was never a coder, never really that interested in being a coder. But what I was always interested in is understanding how you could use technology to help people and help deliver problems. I've always been a bit of a problem solver growing up as a kid in the country in Australia, always interested in building things, making things, being very clear about the objective you were working for and doing everything you can to try and realize that objective and deliver something that's really great. So going through university, my focus was, I did civil engineering at university, but my thesis was building a platform that designed high-rise buildings based on parameters that you set, and it would tell you how to design them. So I was always in that technology space. And then I came over to the UK and I started working in law firms and eventually financial services, like you mentioned. And everything I've done has been about delivering change, essentially understanding an outcome that you're trying to work towards, and then gathering people together to deliver that outcome. So I started off in the early noughties, doing mainly application type projects with a bit of infrastructure, so desktop rollouts, commercial off-the-shelf application rollouts across different parts of organizations, merging different offices, spinning out businesses, merging businesses. So yes, business and sort of business change, but with a heavy technology leaning. So when you obviously merge businesses, you buy 3 businesses of similar size, you either make a decision to keep all of the technology separate, or you make a decision to consolidate. And I was responsible for consolidating all the technology across some businesses back in the noughties. And then I moved into technology refresh rollouts, like virtualization of servers at a financial services company. And then eventually ended up being responsible for the protection platform for a big insurer in the UK, and ran that for a number of years. So overall, quite a lot of experience with
Yes.
application development, infrastructure, run service desk teams, so a fairly broad spectrum. But my key has always been, and I think the thing that's made me different has always been, I'm really interested in how people get on with technology, really thinking about the journey that you're taking, the people who are affected by the change,
Absolutely.
and taking people on that journey so that the change is successful ultimately.
True. Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that journey from Australia to UK and in your professional experience, right? I think it's definitely quite a journey, and I know I've worked closely with you, so I think it's been 15 years. I know Tim and while we have worked for 2 to 3 years, and then after that we've been at least talking in terms, and I see his work, and not just in the professional but outside of that as well, in terms of how he's contributing to the community. So I mean, I've always been inspired by small things you have done when we work together. Tim, lot of good memories. So I'm privileged and definitely happy to have you to talk about your favorite and passionate topic, program management and also change management, right? While we deep dive into it. So, and once again, thank you so much. I know when we were just talking before this, right? So Flynn was 5 years. Now he's in high school, and belated wishes to your daughter who turned 17 yesterday. So I think uh, time has passed so much, and yeah, I think I sent you my kids' pictures too. So my daughter is like 9, and then my son is like 6. So it is.
Yeah, when we first started working together, you didn't have children. Yeah, no,
Yes.
and mine are all grown up and almost off to university. It's astonishing.
Yes. That's wonderful. I think sometimes, as you said, right, you were doing a cataloging of the pictures. So I think I started looking at the people who I worked with, and the inspirations and the learnings you've accumulated, which is tremendous. So I'll go into the first question I had. I mean, we've chatted about it a while, and I know we've been trying to get you live. This is your first live, so I'm very happy to have you into such platform and bring you into such space, which is new, and we've been talking about for 4 or 5 months, and then we finally live today. So my first question is on the evolution of the how the delivery process or program management has evolved, especially with technology advancements. One, I mean, you have seen a lot, right? So I just thought of I've put together a kind of a fishbone, which just says the enhancement of the delivery process, just for a quick glimpse for the audience. But then I'll let it go, and then I'll let you talk about how the journey has been, right? Especially from in terms of executing a small project to large transformations, be it digital strategy, or I think we worked in MS Access as a database source as well, to now we are looking at a lot of cloud and ChatGPT and Gen AI. So I mean, it's tremendous, right? You've seen from impacting or having that change, impacting the business. So please talk about that. I would like to hear more on how you have seen the technology evolution, and how it has helped, or what are the pros and cons.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed a huge amount in the last 25 years, as you could imagine. In fact, a lot of the things that I thought would be really great ideas have now come to fruition. I remember talking to a chap I worked with years ago, probably around 2011, talking about how desktop virtualization has to be the future, because the amount of effort that was put into refreshing desktops and trying to make them standard so that you could roll them out and avoid issues was just astonishing. So when desktop virtualization came in over the last 10 years, it's sort of no surprise. But I mean, when I started, broadband was dial-up. I mean, you might recall sort of the old telephone number dial-up broadband. That's how we connected to the internet. And of course, the most significant thing is that everything is now connected. And that connectivity has become robust, and the broadband has become sufficient to be able to support cloud services. So we've now had the introduction over the last 15 years or so of cloud services, starting with infrastructure. So you didn't need to hire infrastructure specialists necessarily. You could go and buy infrastructure running in the cloud as a service, and with service levels attached to it that you couldn't dream of achieving internally. And all you needed was a good, nice, big fat pipe from your business out into the internet in order to be able to provide that, and a little bit of cash. So that's probably the most significant change, is that connectivity of our businesses with the outer world. Then that's brought cloud services, more latterly applications running as a service. And then all the tools and capabilities that come with that allow us to focus on change in other areas. So where, 20 years ago, we were focusing on desktop rollouts and infrastructure refreshes, those are still happening, but they're much more easier to execute now. And so you can roll those programs out to project managers with perhaps less experience and focus your more experienced skill sets on the more complex changes in the application space, for example, or just the pure business change space. So yes, cloud platforms have really changed things. There's been a huge shift in applications as a consequence of that. We've gone from people buying software and then having to refresh that every now and then to now buying software as a service.
Yep.
Paying for a subscription model, which on the face of it can look expensive, but now that's sort of for the bigger platforms, it's rolled out globally, and the costs are negligible compared with what they were in the past.
Yeah, I think if you very funny incident, right? If we have to really call you to get the mission up and running, if the video is not working, somebody has to switch on the system to make sure that the video is coming up, when people are working offshore. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, we had it's still a bit of a joke, but it's a bit of a running joke in the industry, isn't there, that the standard service desk response to an issue is to reboot. And in fact, one of my jobs about 15-20 years ago was I decided to roll out a newsletter within the company I was working, just to try and engage better with our customers, our internal customers. And we labeled it Reboot because we thought that was an appropriate name for a newsletter. But yeah, and of course, over the last 5 years, plus 5-10 years, security and data, the connectivity that we now have means that we're able to do a lot more with the technology that we've got. That's generated a lot more data, and now people need to know what to do with that data. So data is a big growth area. And with that connectivity and with that data comes a responsibility to protect the data and security there, and protect not just the data, but the businesses that you've connected to the internet. So that security being the other big growth area. So there's a lot that's changed in the technology space. I'm not so sure that the projects themselves or the disciplines required to deliver successful projects have necessarily changed a huge amount. Yes, the tools have changed, but fundamentally, I think project management is a people game. It's a people business. It's about talking to stakeholders to understand what you're trying to achieve, the goal you're trying to aim for, the why is what are you trying to get your team around a common goal and delivering to a really focused outcome, and then along the journey being very sensitive to the people, and what they're doing. So clear responsibilities for individuals, clear in small goals to get to the next stage, intervening when things aren't going wrong, having a sense of where things may go wrong. It's really a people business, delivery. And I think the people who are successful really think about the people, whether that's the stakeholders that they're engaging with to bring them on the journey or to make them part of the journey, or the team in order to understand, to mobilize them around a common goal, or whether it's the users, the end people affected by the change. I think in the past that bit has been probably forgotten. The sort of the impact on end users, particularly with infrastructure projects. You find in the old days, people used to just go and do stuff to people, whereas I think that's changed. That has changed. I think people are much more sensitive about that change management aspect, about trying to avoid disruption to the business operation and thinking about what people are doing and how this change may affect them and how you affect the change without causing disruption or disturbance to that operation.
True. I think you rightly brought a very valid point that while the technology has advanced a lot, the project management aspect, the people aspect to the project management or program management or running a large project still is live and still alive. So human connections are very important when you actually come to deliver something as a cohesive unit. So absolutely. So I think no second thoughts on that. So I just want to deep dive onto your banking and financial experience in terms of building a lot of different products for insurance. I mean, you've done a lot of B2B and B2C kind of a products evolution, and how is the how do you see that has evolved with technology in terms of the user being more aware? And probably it may not be earlier. With Waterfall, you actually build a product for a while, and then while it may go to market, or sometimes it may not, but while it goes to market, maybe it may do well, or probably there is a competitor there. But today, with the the way things are changing so fast with the technology advancements, how do you see that from a banking and financial, especially the insurance space, where you predominantly you worked, and you also done in the you've done change management for the research organizations too, right? So how you see that evolved in terms of getting the right product, but with quality on time, and continuously building and being part of the user journey. That's a very difficult process to be in, right? When you actually, it looks very sophisticated from a user standpoint when he keeps seeing the change coming up from a user experience, but then the underlying process that goes with a lot of people, I think you're seeing in day out.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally the tools that we use to deliver project have changed. So we used to do essentially only waterfall projects. So you start off with understanding what's required, you then work to a design phase, you work into a build phase, a test phase, an implementation phase, and then a post-implementation phase. And of course, the challenge with, that's one thing. And then from a relationship perspective, there was always a big lean on this customer supplier type culture. So your stakeholder in the business are your customer, and you are a supplier to them. And that service ethic was strong and really sort of fundamental to the approach, the waterfall approach, and that governance of a project, if you like. The problem with that was that you would invest a lot in a waterfall project to understand requirements, and then move to a design phase, and then move to a build phase. And you wouldn't see anything until you got to probably a test phase, which could be many months down the line and at a huge expense, a lot of resources all mobilized. And then your business priorities have all changed. And the goalposts have therefore moved. That's one issue. The other issue was that this customer supply model meant that the stakeholder had to be managed. So if things weren't going right, the project manager and the project team would often spend energy writing reports at cost, thinking about what those reports said. So if things weren't going quite right, then how do we manage that message? And then intervening at risk of losing trust and confidence of that stakeholder. And so over the last, Agile then came into the mainstream, I don't know, the last 12, 15 years. Agile development's been around for a very long time, but our Agile project delivery is more recent. And with online tools like the Atlassian's products, for example, the Agile space has boomed. People have really warmed to it, and it's closed some of those gaps. It's allowed us to go and deliver projects and show some evidence of success early on, or failure early on. It's allowed us to deliver, essentially break a big project or program down into smaller chunks, and then show light of what we're doing fairly early on, so that decisions can be made early on and throughout the continuous cycle of a project to change goalposts or meet different business outcomes. So that's one thing it's done. And the other thing that it tries to achieve, although I'm not sure it's always successful, is to get your stakeholder in the room. So if you wind the clock back to the days of Microsoft starting up, or some of the more modern online tech platforms, these are a couple of people in a room, in a garage, a developer, perhaps a couple of developers, but two people had a very clear understanding of the product that they were trying to achieve. So clear business outcome, and some people with the capability through their development skills to actually achieve that. Essentially in a room working collaboratively on the same team. And that's what Agile tries to achieve, is you've got a business stakeholder, a couple of stakeholders who really understand what they're trying to achieve, but they can't achieve it because they don't have the skills. And so they have developers and other experts in the room with them, and together they achieve this outcome. And so you get the stakeholder in the room. So it's not a matter of reporting up necessarily where you are and where you expect to get to, and then having to make excuses when you don't get to where you want to get to. All the key stakeholders that are interested in that outcome are in the room and they're delivering together. And that's what Agile tries to achieve. And that's been a huge change over the last, as I said, 10 or 15 years. And all pretty much without exception, all my projects and programs have been Agile based over the last 10 plus years. And it's a unique and fantastic way to work. But there's still a place for Waterfall. Yeah. There's still a place to do a structured program of work where you have set milestones and you want those sorts of controls. So there's space for both, but yes, some of the new ways of working are pretty exciting and working well, I think.
I think it's an evolving state even today. I mean, as you said that, right? Agile has been there for a while, but the adoption of it has been a challenge across the industry. And even today, a lot of people do say that, hey, we are an Agile organization. But then if you look at it from Agile, just a label, but under which you will still doing the waterfallish kind of an approach. Right? But because it's more of not just a process or a execution methodology, right? But it should be more of it's a development life cycle. But how do you have the people work in Agile environment, right? The mindset and the change management of it. Right? It's not just
that's the most
the important point is how the people in the team really believes in that and starts doing that way. And
well, that's the hardest thing, I think, is again, it's a people game. This is about people understanding how to deliver an outcome, and ultimately you want
in pieces.
I mean, the whole idea of Agile is that it's a collective, it's a team effort, it's a collective effort, but you still need to create that culture, and that needs energy. Somebody needs to go in with the energy to generate that environment, and that's ultimately going to be down to probably one, in practical terms, one individual. In the Agile world, that might be a Scrum Master, or a product owner, somebody with the energy to try and drive the team. I've had very successful projects I've run, Agile projects I've run before, and successful only because of one hire. That I've hired very quiet, very academic, very capable engineers who did not effectively communicate between themselves. And indeed, one engineer in particular was created a bit of an environment where there's some tension. But another engineer that we hired was effusive, energetic, charismatic, and a very, very effective communicator. And that engineer being put amongst the others just completely gelled the group. And I've spoken to many of the team. Even today, I'm still in touch with them all, the people who are part of that development team. And they say it was the best deliveries that they've ever worked on, because the culture in the team was very much about understanding common goal, working together, collaborating, communicating. So that's the environment you have to create, and it's a people game. You can't necessarily prescribe how to do that. What you need to do is to know what that looks like as a project manager, a scrum master, or a program leader. You need to understand what that looks like, and then start to put the pieces of a puzzle, put the people in the team in order to deliver that outcome. And if you're not succeeding, change it. Tweak the people. Send them on training, allow people to make mistakes. These things don't happen overnight. It's a cultural change process. So it takes a number of months to establish a really good Agile team that's operating at a really high performing level.
Yeah, I think it's especially when it comes to the industry where there are a lot of regulation, because when you actually build a product, you have to go through a lot of regulations, and before it is getting released, or even a change, any small defect might actually have a bigger impact in the environment, right? So have you seen that as a challenge in terms of when you're delivering programs, especially from a domain standpoint, in terms of internal
Yeah,
policies, and maybe they may not work in agile and answer questions or trying to get you through in the way the outcome has to be. So how have you navigated those challenges?
I think it's a very good question, and I think everyone has a different answer to how they might approach it. I've just been speaking recently to a CTO based in the States who believes that engineers should be entirely responsible for their quality, the quality of what they produce. And I agree with that to a huge extent. I think as soon as you put a tester in amongst the pigeons, the engineer has an opportunity to leave the quality for the tester to pick
Yeah.
up. But I would argue against that to say, yes, that is a risk. You put a tester in with an engineer, there is a risk that the engineer waives his or her responsibilities to drive quality. And I would say that agile is about a team effort. It's about looking after. It's about a common outcome, and everyone has a responsibility for that outcome, and so everyone has to do their best to drive that outcome. And in your example, where you have regulation and certain other checks and balances to worry about, in the payment card industry, for example, you have to be very, very careful about what you're developing and the quality of what you're producing. I would say that you lean on some of the capabilities that came with Waterfall. So when you're building your stories, or your pieces of work that the engineer is going to use, you think about and you define what done looks like. So when you develop this widget or this piece of code, what does success look like? And that success isn't purely functional. We need to think about performance. We need to think about how it looks. We need to think about its security. We need to think about its compliance with regulation. And those non-functional requirements, if you like, will be relevant more or less, depending on the widget that you're developing at that particular moment. But you need the people who have that experience. So the compliance people, the data protection people, the IT security people. You need those people engaged and active and supporting you to help you define what done looks like, what success looks like. And then the engineer knows what's expected of them when they write that code. And the tester knows with the engineer what's expected of them when they test and validate that code does what it needs to do. And by doing that, yes, you've sort of broken Waterfall down into a small bit that's essentially agile, but you're achieving the outcome that you're describing, which is that you need. It's not just we're not producing games here. We're producing a product that has a very, very high quality standard. Not that games don't have a high quality standard, of course they do, but it's different. You can't lose people's money. There's a different impact on the consumers of your product if you haven't got that quality absolutely spot on.
True. I think it's not the objective is not to use a methodology and then force fit, but then how do you, the outcome is the end business user, and what is the impact this project or product is trying to make in the business, and whatever it takes to deliver that. It could break into an iterative or agile. Still, you want to build add a waterfall to it, to making sure that whatever it takes to get that quality, as you say, that's very, very essential. That's the true outcome as a team.
Yeah. I just want to go back to something you asked earlier about things that have changed, because there's a couple of other things. AI, of course, I didn't mention AI, but AI is now an emerging technology that's going to be really interesting to see how that changes. I think we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. But I think the other big change is that a lot of the individuals coming up through the ranks have now got the benefit of 30, 40 years worth of industry experience, which is now fed into the education system. So you now have people with computer science degrees who have a wealth of knowledge from those degrees. I worked for somebody in my last job who was only 10 years younger than me, but her knowledge of change and change disciplines and change methods, and particularly on the business change side, was astonishingly good, far beyond anything that I know. I'm far more practical. I've learned through experience over many, many years, but there's some really, really experienced people coming through. I think the one thing that we mustn't forget in the technology change space is it's still an engineering discipline. You still need very, very solid
Absolutely.
engineers, good, competent engineers at the core of what you're trying to achieve if you want good product out the door. Otherwise, you're going to be producing cars that break down.
Very, very true. I think, I mean, I definitely agree with you on that, right? The quality of the team, especially the engineers, matters, right? I think end of day, that's what is going to show up in your final quality and what output you're going to get. Okay, moving on to the next question, right? I just want to digress a bit before we come back to change management, right? That's your passionate topic. On your I mean, you've been very focused in terms of contributing back to the society, and I've seen a lot of initiatives, whether doing triathlon or cycling across country for generating funds, and I think there are a lot you've been doing, be it back in Australia or in UK. So talk about that. And I know that the organization you're working are also enabling you to do it. I mean, where we've exchanged chat about the contributions, what the revenue contributions. I mean, whatever they're generating is going to a charity, especially for, talk about more on that from your journey and how you're able to do it, and how you can inspire everybody else around to actually be part of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. I'm not entirely money focused as an individual. Everyone needs money in order to survive and to do what they want to do. But I'm very, very interested in balancing what I take for myself and my family personally with what others need and what society kind of needs more generally. I guess it's instilled in me since I was a child. But so going through my career, I've always had a leaning for people. I think it's probably it's sort of back to that people thing. I've always had a leaning for people and trying to understand people and understand the world and help where I can. And I think back in the early noughties, one of the jobs that I had, I was running IT for a large law firm based in the southwest of the UK, and they asked me to head their corporate social responsibility program, which was the buzzword at the time, CSR. And so I did that for a little while. I was fairly young, so I found I wasn't quite sure what I was doing, but it was really interesting to see at that time how there was quite a big play in the industry, particularly in the UK, about giving back. Companies not just taking money from the societies in which they operate, but companies that try and give back and contribute to the societies they base themselves in and service. And we've now seen since then the B Corp movement come to fruition, and that seems to be doing very well. The millennial generation, I think, is very sensitive to doing a bit of good in the world, and I think that's fantastic. And more recently, I've been working with the big law firm, a big financial services company that I've been working with over the last 10 years, has a very progressive and vibrant community cares program that all the staff get involved in, more or less. And it creates a very nice balance between being a corporate commercial enterprise and also being a socially responsible enterprise. So one of the reasons I've essentially contracted with this company but gone back to them many, many times is because of the values that they have and the culture that they've fostered. I really value what they contribute, and I feel like being part of that is rewarding in more ways than money could provide. So I'm just about to move into a permanent role with a group that has businesses across the UK, Canada, Australia, and Ireland. And as you mentioned, their core is to do good by the communities in which they operate, and they give all of their profits to charity, which is an astonishing thing.
Wow.
And they're the third biggest corporate donor in the UK. And I'm really looking forward, very excited in just over a week to be joining them and helping them deliver change fast, deliver change and value as quickly as as one reasonably can, and deliver change that's commercial, knowing that all the benefits that change will deliver, where financial, will result in profits and revenues and profits that will contribute to other great causes.
That's very, I mean, it's goosebumps, right? That, I mean, when you hear something like that is happening, and it's sometimes planet aligns you towards an objective, and then it happens for a reason. So I mean, good luck, and all the best for your new role. But again, to be part of such a novel, contributions, and the agenda, what they have. I mean, when you talked about offline, it was definitely, I went and actually started doing an understanding of their business and research, and how their what is their value system. It's commendable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we all got something. We can all learn something from that. I think some of it comes from our family upbringing, some of it from the cultural upbringing. I think the Indian culture is similar. UK culture and other cultures I've spent a bit of time with in Japan and with Japanese
Yes.
people. I think there's a real giving back culture in these communities in which I've worked, and I think that's really important for all of us to do more of that, or at least, but remain commercial. Obviously these businesses wouldn't survive if they weren't thriving commercially, but always think about fellow man, if you like.
Right. I think there's a saying in Indian, right? So, I mean, we get rain because there are such companies or people exist, right? I mean, in the world of climate change, and everybody is actually more selfish and trying to grab as much resources possible from the environment, but contributing back as a conscious effort. And if you're doing it as an organization, it's definitely something commendable, right? I mean, yes, there are definitely good people exist too in the world, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, again, I want to bring back to this concept of VUCA, right? The VUCA world where we are living in, right? So I just put together a small slide for that, which I just want to flash it up. Okay, so I mean, this is again what I wanted to conclude from your last conversation is, while you have knowledge, that's not very important, because I just read this book from John Doyer on the measure what matters, right? So he specifically, I picked up this statement. This is very, very, I mean, I truly believe in this, and I thought, while it's flashing, that I wanted to talk about it, right? Knowledge was secondary and execution all important, right? You made that point as well during your previous conversations on how things have evolved, what is very important, while everybody possesses a lot of knowledge, but then actually showing that and accomplishing something which is very important, right? I think it's very, very important message. And then going back to the VUCA conversation, right? So in this ambiguous, volatile, complex world, right, a lot of things are very uncertain. I mean, we while we may know something, but the focus is always on what is the other person is knowing, right? And we don't work on the something called the knowledge asymmetry, where you focus on what you really deeply know, and then try to build on that. So how do you, what has been your core, Tim? I know that I've seen you very quickly going into putting together a release deployment plan in the MPP, or you're so passionate about what you do, right? So I just wanted to pick up that, in this total uncertain world, you've been constantly equipping yourself, learning and running things. So talk about your personal, or even on the professional side, specific things which you really focus on, right, where you don't give up on that as a value, which is important. So maybe we'll because uncertainty is always there, and there is a constant change coming. There's a new technology, there's new people, and probably we change jobs. But as a person, I think I strongly believe in this, and I in this but things are uncertain, but it's fine. I handle it this way.
Yeah, I think with that sort of complexity, that volatility, the ambiguity, the uncertainty of delivery, it can, again, you need to trust yourself and trust your instinct and step back and think about the people that you have available to you or not, and work with those people. And if you don't have those people, find those people, because there are some things that you can't solve. For example, volatility is something you necessarily can't control. So for things like volatility, you just need to build some slack into your plan, essentially. Perhaps that might be extra funds or extra time or extra people, but some slack to cope with the risk around volatility. For complexity, typically you'll be able to lean on people to navigate through complexity. In fact, the Agile project I mentioned earlier was the re-engineering of a authentication service that was used by people across the country, across the UK, hundreds of thousands of people with usernames and passwords, and we had to seamlessly move them from one system to another. This is before you could buy services on the cloud that could do this for you. And reverse engineering a very, very old legacy product where the skills had all gone was tricky. There's a huge amount of complexity involved. And it was worrying me. I didn't really know what to do. And so I had the good fortune of access to a very, very competent engineer, an absolutely brilliant mind. And I engaged him, and together we worked on how we navigate through this situation so that we could create some clarity from that complexity. And we hired another engineer in order to decode and reverse engineer all the coding from the previous legacy product. And so we came up with solutions by engaging the right experts. I mean, I wasn't going to be able to solve that problem because I'm not an expert engineer, whereas I had access to somebody. And if I didn't have access to somebody, I would have had access to somebody who could find somebody. So things like complexity, it's a matter of breaking it down into small pieces of work and working out what expertise you need to navigate through that complexity. And I think the same thing with ambiguity and uncertainty. I think it's a matter of finding the right people to help navigate through those risks and challenges.
I think it's the trust, as you say. I mean, and then constant. It's not like everything under the sky you might know, but I think the constant effort you take to actually learn and try to deliver that's a quality which I think probably I've seen with you too, and the trust in the people, right? And how the relationship you've built.
Yeah, I think that's right. And your point about understanding is really important. As a project manager, I want to understand the objective, and that's not necessarily the big picture goal for the project. I mean, yes, I need to understand that, and the team needs to understand that. But if I have a specific problem, I want to understand that problem, and I want to understand where we're driving to in order to solve that problem. And so at all levels, as a leader of change, I want to understand, and that's not because I'm a control freak or that I'm not prepared to relinquish control and empower my team. Of course, I'm prepared to do that. But if I don't understand where we're going at all different levels, whether that's a junior tester who's only recently gone into testing, and if I don't understand what their objective is, to a senior engineer who's designing a very complex product for me, if I don't understand what they're doing, then I can't put all the pieces of the puzzle together in order to deliver an outcome. So I want to understand all of those different elements of delivery in order to be successful.
I think sometimes you have to be detail oriented. It's not a sin. You can still sit with the team and understand and get your hands dirty. So it's very important as a leader. So that's one of the leadership quality, I think, which everybody should have. quickly moving to the change management, right? I think probably give me your. I know that change management is a passion, and you've definitely OCM. I mean, you've driven a lot of organization change management across your experience, right? So maybe give me the top 5 challenges you have seen, right, in terms of handling the change management effectively, right? If it could be any change which you want to drive. So maybe from your experience, and then uh, briefly you can touch about how did you solve probably one of them, or how did you navigate through that?
It's quite interesting given the political landscape at the moment, and I'm not sure that that the current political climate is a very good demonstration of how to manage change. Fundamentally, in order to manage change effectively, you need to think about the consequences of your actions on people. And if you want to rock the boat and create a big bow wave, then go straight in and do what you need to do. Back in 2000, I joined. I was in a company which we purchased another company. There were 2 people doing my role, and I wanted to do things my way, and he wanted to do things his way. His view of rolling out this particular infrastructure across the business, which all of the staff, 700 staff, were using, was just to go in one weekend and replace all their kit, which would have been a huge disaster to the business. We would have ended up essentially stopping business for a number of days whilst we got it all to work on the Monday. And I wanted to do a phased rollout where we, piloted it with some people, made sure it worked, and then communicated what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, and rolled it out in a sort of controlled and structured way. You can choose either option. Both options have validity. It depends what outcome you want.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you need to think about the outcome. If you're running a business and you want that business to continue to be productive, continuing to serve customers, continuing to design and drive product, continuing to make revenue and profits, then you need to do whatever you can, in my view, to avoid disruption to that operation. And so my preference would be to think about how you do that. And that's going to be first and foremost, and it depends on the change that you're doing, it's going to be about leadership. So depending on the change, so if you've got quite a substantial change going through an organization, getting leaders to help lead with communication, to get their behaviors to represent the change that you want. Right. You need to think about the cultural barriers attached to that change. I mean, when I first started working with offshore teams, I think just a couple of years before I worked with you, Naga, I found the language barrier really difficult to overcome. Both the dialects and the nuances of language. That's with some of the culture. I mean, I've worked with, in India or Vietnam, for example, and your ear tunes in very quickly, but you need to think about communication styles, language. Communication is two-way. It's not just about what you say, it's about what is understood from what you say. I've had difficulties communicating with people in America. So English being first language, and still the way we use language within our industry so substantially different that they're saying one thing and I'm hearing a different thing, because the words mean different things in those different countries. So understanding those cultural barriers and not just the language and the dialects, but the culture, the way that language is interpreted, the way that change is interpreted is very important. And there was actually quite a big program of education that was rolled out in the UK when things started being offshored about 15, 20 years ago, because of exactly that point. Then in order to affect the change, you need to think about your communication. So put a communication plan together. Who are your stakeholders that you want to communicate with? What role will they play in this change? What do you want them to say? When do you want that message to go out? And that will be anything from those leaders communicating core messages and espousing the values of what you're trying to achieve, to the people who are change agents on the ground, so peers, if you like, of those people who are going to have change affected on them. Engage some of those, get them to evangelize your change, and be agents for change within their peer group, to other ways of communicating with people who are affected by change, whether that's email communications or all hands meetings with everyone. Think about all those communication issues and that communication plan and how you're going to roll out that change and bring people with you. And those methods, that plan to communicate, will help minimize resistance to change. There's always going to be resistance to change. People don't like us moving their cheese. I mean, there's been books about it. But what we can do is bring people with us by communicating effectively. And that will also include, for example, explaining why, being transparent about where you are, what's happening, what you're going to do, what's not going right, and why we're doing it. I think that will help also sort of minimize that resistance. And I think the last point is training. I don't know what it's like in other jurisdictions in the US elsewhere, but in the UK, I think we undervalue training in some industries.
True.
But fairly early in my career, probably for the first 5-6 years, I did a big play on training, and to some resistance. But the whole idea of putting a lot of effort into training was to raise the bar on people's competencies with the technology that we were introducing, so that they were really competent to use it. And it's amazing to see how effective culture and competence with technology can become when you train vigorously. You put a lot of energy into training. And I say culture because in that example, we were merging different organizations, 3 different big organizations into one. And so we wanted to merge not just the technology and the processes, but the culture, and try and create a new identity.
Absolutely.
This new
I think
business.
especially when you merge organization, it's an amalgamation of people, and technology is then coming. But I think especially you need to, the first is you talk to that person. So of course, that unless you have that enablement happening, so it's difficult. Otherwise, it's like you have 3 companies under one roof, but it's still there, separated by the different walls, and you don't talk to each other. And I've seen that a lot of times when there's different companies you acquire, or probably I've seen it. So yes, I think thanks for very, very important points you've talked about, especially leadership. Communicating top down is very, very important, because you exhibit that behavior that there is a change, and it's important, and it's a much needed change which needs to be adopted. Probably the way you communicate, again, handling the language barrier, right? I think I've put together that because change management is a very, very important topic at any given point in time in life. So even if I go 20 years later too, I think this is going to be a very important aspect of the industry, in whichever industry it is, right? So it's all we're dealing with people. So yeah, as you say, that the constraints are very, very similar. But I strongly believe, I think you rightly pointed out, that the leadership should exhibit that behavior of change and start communicating, and then more training. And I think there's small things you could do, especially understanding how it can be put together for one culture versus other, and then more training. Over communication is very important, especially when it comes to change management, right? I would say, instead of not communicating, being transparent and do more communication.
Yeah.
Yes.
I often say you can't over communicate. In fact, I'm going to labor this point, because when I'm interviewing for program or project managers, I always ask them what they think is important. And I shouldn't give this away, because if anyone watches this, then they will know what to say. But if I don't hear communication, then for me, they don't really understand the discipline. The most important thing is communication, and you can't over communicate, and you really can't. And so when you're delivering change, it is that leadership through to training at the other end, but there's all these other cycles of communication you need to go through, and it's all about resisting the impact of change, whether that's bringing staff in to talk about a new corporate identity because you want to rebrand, or why do you do that? Well, you do that because you want to bring people with you, and you want to minimize the resistance to change. You want people to evangelize what you're trying to achieve as a business, and they're not going to do that if you don't even involve them in the process. So all of this is about engagement and communication and collaboration with those people who are most affected by the change. And that doesn't mean you can't be brave. That doesn't mean you can't be brave and get on, make
Bold,
difficult decisions, etc.
Yes.
But it means as much as possible you engage, you collaborate, and bring people with you.
Yes. I mean, the adoption is smooth. Otherwise, it's going to be definitely there a lot of give and take, and it's going to be a bit rough. The path to achieve the change could be more rough. Yeah, a lot
Yes,
of
exactly.
casualties you need to handle.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. If you don't do those activities to minimize resistance to change, then you will suffer the consequences. And going back to that early example of rolling out infrastructure that everyone's using without any testing and any consultation, without any communication, you're going to spend a lot of effort fixing the problems after the event. Why not spend that effort in advance, avoiding the problems altogether, and allow the business to continue to run? It will be cheaper. It'll be less disruptive. It's going to help you because it'll maintain trust and confidence in your capabilities and what you and your team can do. There is no reason not to engage with those people affected by what you're doing. There is every reason to do it. So it's a compelling sort of star to follow within the change discipline is think about the people that you're affecting and think about what you're going to do to communicate and engage with them to bring them on the journey to go from where they are today to where you want them to be.
Absolutely. I think it's amazing to hear I mean, your experience and what is important. I mean, when you see that on the ground, and it's fascinating to relate and say, okay, of course, whatever you said is very, very, true. And moving to, I mean, I know you've talked about a bit on the AI, but tell me personally how AI is helping you in these days, like especially in the last 3 years with a lot of buzzword around Gen AI and ChatGPT. So let's give a quick glimpse, or any conversation without AI is definitely not not worth it these days, right? So I think I know you are curious with your kids also. I mean, they should be ahead of in terms of using all the novel technologies in AI, but I know that you're always catching up and you're up to date. So talk about that. And I know you also mentioned that, hey, when we were starting to do this for a while and we were exchanging some topics, and you said, hey, it's a coincidence, and I was just going to this conference or training. So talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think we're all, I mean, I don't know what the sort of general perception is, but I think there's a lot of people in the UK who are both excited by AI and frightened by it, and perhaps a little cynical about it. We've all seen emerging technologies that are overhyped. I think AI is, like many technologies, going to be something that has massive benefits and is a huge agent for change, but won't necessarily result in all of the things that we fear it will result in. For project management, as I said, and perhaps it's one of the reasons why I mentioned it's a people game, because it's a people game. You can't replace that with artificial intelligence.
AI project managers, management agents.
Yeah. Fundamentally, we're trying to deliver business outcomes for people, entrepreneurs and business leaders who know where they want to go. And in order for us to do that, we need to engage, we need to understand, and then we need to interpret that direction, and we need to work out how we're going to deliver it. And then in order to deliver it, we need to gather our experts around us and bring them together to start treading that journey, walking that path together. That's a people business. That's about communication. That can't be replaced with AI, in my view. What can help us, though, is a lot of the cyclical administrative stuff that sits around delivery. So in the technology space, AI can be hugely beneficial to develop coding, engineers, development processes, driving quality, thinking about those non-functional requirements we spoke about earlier. So perhaps thinking left and right in terms of the code to make sure that that code is delivering all the different things that experience would recommend that that code delivers, which is often falls short with perhaps more junior developers, for example. I think in the PMO space, so the project management office, those people supporting delivery, things like reporting, accounting for your costs and those sorts of things, perhaps some of those can be automated. The production of presentations and engagement products, so PowerPoints and those sorts of things in order to communicate messages, all those sorts of things AI can hugely help with, no doubt. And in fact, I'm using that today for some of what I do. But fundamentally, the core of delivery is a people sport. It's about people working together to deliver an outcome, and the core of it, most of it, will be people driven, not AI driven, in my view.
Absolutely. I think I there's no second thought on that, Tim. I mean, you're spot on, and yeah, it's the trade-off. You have to definitely the human in the loop, or especially in this space in terms of execution and program management, and having the right connections and getting it. You have to steer it to in the right path. You need that leader and you need the direction. Yes, of course, technology can enable, like as you said. I mean, I also strongly believe in that. Before we wrap up, I have a quick rapid fire. I've just put together a quick few questions. I'll just pick up. I'm not going to go all, maybe less than 60 seconds. Let's do rapid fire and program management.
Fire away.
Biggest factor for program success. I'll give options: team alignment, clear goals, executive sponsorship, risk management.
Team alignment.
Perfect. What do you track most often? Milestones, budget, resources, risks?
That's a tough one, because one would normally go milestones, but I think risks, because I'm always thinking about things that could go wrong so that we can prevent anything from going wrong.
I also definitely believe in that. Yes, you need to track that. The risk issue and dependency log, it's the first thing. Start putting it. Yes, true. Your top communication tool: email, Slack, Teams, stand-up meetings, dashboards.
Stand-up meetings.
Perfect. When a program is off track, what do you tackle first? Timeline, team performance, stakeholder buy-in, root cause analysis.
You can't fix anything if you don't know its root cause analysis.
Perfect. All right, that's very good. I think you're spot on there. How often should you review the roadmap? Weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly?
Are we talking strategic roadmap?
Yes. Let's say I mean, in the safe construct, let's say you're putting together a program objective and you have a roadmap.
So a larger portfolio, probably monthly.
Okay.
Possibly quarterly.
Possibly quarterly. Yes. Yeah. The PI goes for quarter. Probably you do it every PI. Yes.
Yeah.
What's your risk strategy style? This is the last question. I don't want to prolong. Proactive mitigation, wait and watch, escalate early, keep stakeholders calm.
My inclination is to escalate early, but I actually proactively mitigate. I try to avoid the risks and mitigate them before I need to communicate up the chain.
Very true. Very true. That's all I had. It's so. I mean, I'm so happy, and it's wonderful having this conversation and talking through the field which you're passionate about, change management and the program management, right? So I hope the audience enjoyed the conversation, and I know I think I could, whatever I could get in this hour, but definitely I will do one more with you in a detailed conversation after you actually go into your new role and how that the corporate social responsibility part of it coming through, right? So we will dwell in it in a while. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming to my show and enlightening with your knowledge and experience. Right, it's wonderful to have you and talk through this. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, Naga, and thanks for your time. I really had a good time.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.